Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Kerbal Space Program. We want to go to nowhere, actually. Surprisingly, we're not going to be leaving Kerbin today. We're going to be setting up a little bit of a station in orbit. Relatively low. I think we get it up to about 130,000 or so in terms of distance. But the purpose of this is to have a little bit of a station for either relaying science or potentially refueling rockets. So it's going to consist of this main core, what we're building now on screen, and you'll notice that this whole episode is going to be sped up. Essentially, it's 3 missions kind of in one, just so we can get rockets up there and do all the proper testing required. We're also going to be trying to build a little bit more aesthetic than maybe we have been in the past, because this is going to be a little bit more of a permanent structure, not a one-time use rocket. And so you're going to see us experimenting with some parts, clipping, getting things moved around. So for example, this kind of core habitat module with radiators on all 4 sides, almost like space armor that you might see on like maybe a tank, just because I thought it looked cool. I don't really know what radiators do in the Kerbal Space Program, so there's always that. We're going to be using some of these spacer objects here, and I don't have the large Clampatron docking port just yet, and that kind of creates a little bit of a scale issue. So this is, again, just going to be a small kind of refueling relay outpost that's going to be in orbit around. And, we can expand it later on by using some of these clamps. That way, we have the kind of this redundant clamp mechanism encircling this kind of station. But overall, I think it looks pretty cool and functional at the same time. You can keep 3 Kerbin up here. So for example, if you have a craft and maybe you just want to drop people off here in orbit, and maybe they want to hitch a ride going the opposite way, but your crew might not be back at base, you can kind of drop them off here and land a vessel, and then come up, refuel, move some crew around and over, and it's kind of a decent way to go about this. Now this is, I think, the heaviest piece of the station. The other 2 modules, which are basically, spoiler alert, kind of a fueling nozzle, so a long nozzle for fuel tanks to be hooked up to and potentially transfer fuel, and then a relay module and a little bit of a tow truck module. But we'll talk about those when we start building them exactly. We're going to add some solar panels to this stage just so that it can generate some power. We have some lights on it, which is, I think this is the first craft that we have with some proper lighting, which is always good. It makes these things in space look pretty superb, in my opinion, if you get your lighting placed in some dramatic angles there. And we're going to over-engineer the main sail and the upper stage. I haven't built a space station in a long time, so I'm not really 100% sure on the requirements to get this thing into space. Again, I don't use any mods. I don't use a MechJeb or anything to tell me what the delta V of our rockets are or anything like that. I don't calculate anything. I just 100% wing it, which is the way I kind of enjoy doing a Kerbal Space Program. I enjoy the experimentation aspect of the game, and then it kind of feels like, even though I might not be doing things optimal, it feels like my knowledge is kind of growing inherently. So we have a main sail at the bottom there, which ends up getting replaced with multiple of these small Rokomax engines, like our little boosters that we have attached to this. Again, probably way too heavy of a rocket than we really need, but we're going to launch this thing anyways and get this thing up into orbit on this first go. And you can see a lot of engines carrying this thing to the side there. We have staging set up. I think this is an asparagus type staging where all the boosters are kind of throwing its fuel into the main sail. And once they're gone, the main sail is left with full fuel capacity. And then that will just take us into space here. And for a little while there, I didn't think we were going to have enough thrust, but keep at it and follow that prograde marker and you'll definitely get up there. We're going to shell and discard some of these and watch them fall away by going interior view here. There's a good shot of the coverings going towards the sun, and also Kerbin for you guys. I don't know, there's certain aspects to Kerbal Space Program that I really enjoy for the cinematic aspects. Now, I'm not great at taking these type of shots. You know, I build things. I don't necessarily record beauty shots, but it's cool nonetheless to do every so often. At this point, we are running on the upper stage, and really, we could have gone with almost without this stage entirely. We haven't really used any of its fuel or anything like that, but that's okay because this is kind of a proof of concept rocket build. In fact, I'm probably going to save this rocket design for later, for maybe sending space stations to maybe the moon or maybe to Minmus and get those set up. And it's just good to know the lifting capabilities of this thing. And even if it can come up here and possibly refuel at this station that we're building now, that in itself, I think, makes this rocket design a little bit of a success. Maybe not the best, but it's worth a shot. There is a little bit of a probe core inside of it, and it has a little antenna, so we can deorbit these. And, you know, normally you would just let these burn up in the atmosphere, but on this attempt, I decided to do a little bit of a landing attempt just to see how this upper stage would perform. We are using the second stage rocket engine, which is definitely far more useful in the vacuum of space. Coming down into the atmosphere with it is a little bit of a mistake, and something that I didn't really look at its stats too much besides its vacuum ISP, simply because of that's where I was going to use it at. But I figured that, you know, it's a pretty big engine. It might be able to land this thing. No, not at all. Doesn't have hardly any thrust down at water surface level at all. So figured that out the hard way. We gonna go ahead with a little bit more of a redesigned rocket here and adding more engines, because more engines is always fun, and we are using some bigger rockets on the sides. I think that's a little bit more of a streamlined look. I like this design than using like 6 rocket boosters all around the mainsail. To me, you know, I work kind of relatively close to the Orion space shuttle. Not actually in Florida, but I support the people who are working on it in real life. That's me job. So I felt like I wanted to use the same kind of rocket design that they're going to be using that thing to get into space, right? So kind of a main center core and then 2 side tanks, and that's about it. It's a nice kind of seamless, clean design. It also makes me think of SpaceX a little bit as well with their heavy Falcon. But what we're building now is the trellis, or, you know, a little bit of a fueling arm that is going to be sticking out the bottom of our space station. This thing's going to have a little bit of its own power, right? It's going to have some radiators on it as a little bit of a exterior hull, right? Because you want to protect these fuel pods that are running up the spine of it. And I just thought it kind of looked cool. It looked a little bit like a barrel, right? And like maybe rails that you could attach things to. We're going to have some lights going through it just for some interior cool lighting that you can have. And some just clamps on every side of this thing so that we can transfer fuel through it and have a successful refueling point. Now, these fuel tanks in the center there, that's not really going to hold the bulk of the fuel. What we're probably going to do is end up hauling tankers up there. And with this nozzle more so is for hooking up to your current spacecraft and refueling that from large tankers that I want to haul up there and store just attached to the main building itself. It's kind of a basic concept. I'm sure many people have done this before, but to me it's always enjoyable to do. It's also going to house some monopropellant on here just to kind of break up the surface a little bit, and just a simple nozzle on each end so we can kind of basically dock it from any direction as we need there. We'll also put probably some RCS kind of nozzles in there just so we can control it on the docking stage, because when it comes to getting these things docked in space, I'm not the best anymore. I used to be pretty good at it, but here lately I'm finding that it's taking a few attempts, and yeah, I did cut out a fair amount of failures this episode when it comes to that. So this is the KSS fuel arm being added to the rocket here. Now this thing is really light. Attaching it to the heavy rocket lifting module here, it seems a little overkill, but I figured we might as well. We're going to take off, you know, where the module is trying to catch up to us, and there's a nice lift off right there, and we'll follow it up into space. We do look inside the fairing just because I like to see, make sure nothing's rattling around too much in there, and making sure that it doesn't start wobbling. I don't think I added some struts in some key areas, so this thing does wobble quite a bit as it gets up through the atmosphere, but eventually once you hit space it does kind of stop due to the no air resistance, which is pretty helpful there. And we're gonna take this thing out because I really missed the space station on this launch. Kind of normal. You're kind of guessing a lot of the times whenever you're doing this, so we're gonna go out farther this time, and it's another good test to see kind of the limitations of this rocket design. We'll have to go a few orbits until the space station kind of catches up to us, because it is going around faster than we are. We'll do a little bit, some minor course corrections so we can kind of meet up for it. And this takes, you know, a few corrections, which, you know, not ideal, but you know, I wanted to really kind of test the limits of this, or I'm just really bad at the game and I'm using that as an excuse. It's probably the second one. But now that we have the angles matching, we're basically trying to fiddle with the shape of the orbit so that we can get a little bit of a meetup, making sure the periaps when we do this does not drop below 70,000, which, by the way, spoiler alert, definitely is on this one, but that's fine. It doesn't drop below really 68,000, which is plenty enough to stay in orbit at least a few trips. But if it stayed like that long enough, we would definitely deorbit ourselves. So on this quick injection to meet up with the space station relay, it's just a good idea to do this on the first go as much as possible. So what we do here is we get these lined up as close as possible. We do make our burn. Granted, I probably did that a little late. And then as soon as I'm close to this, I start burning prograde to the target. And what this is going to do is slow my relative speed to the target of the space station. And you'll see that it kind of matches our orbit naturally. And what that does is, because we're going the same speed, the game kind of really realizes, in orbital mechanics, realizes this, that your orbital kind of distance from Kerbin becomes about the same if you're going about the same speed. We have now in sight, I believe, or pretty close to it, so we're going to just kind of burn over directly at the space station, and we'll flip around, hopefully, use testing some RCS just to make sure that's working. And I am really not good at RCS flying these spaceships, which is kind of poor form, I would say. But there it is, and there it goes. We totally passed it on the first attempt. Using the RCS fuel to slow down was probably a little bit of a waste of monopropellant, but that's okay. We'll get this thing turned around. It does turn a little slowly. It's a bit bulky due to all the fuel and the size of the engine and everything. We probably could have just used one of the small Poodle engines for this stage itself, but you know, get this thing moved around. I don't think it has any solar panels, so we're kind of working against the clock, especially on the dark side of the planet here, because we have no power generation, which makes this a little bit of a stressful thing. The big rocket at the bottom there, it does give us some power every time we fire it up, which is pretty handy. I'm not gonna lie, we probably would have run out of power if we didn't have that, what I'm calling a feature. And then we just approach this and totally knock it sideways. Use a little bit of time warp there to freeze it in place. And then we're gonna try again. So we'll swing this puppy around, line this up, stop relative to target, and then just try and thrust kind of as slow as possible over to this node, which I think, if my memory serves right, we'll turn on the lights so you guys can actually see this episode, and it looks cool as well, which definitely helps. We'll pull up next to it, kind of slow down, point the nose at the docking node so that we're kind of lined up, and then just slowly get close to it, turn off RCS and SAS so that nothing weird happens. We'll get this thing lined up back to its vertical orientation since we knocked it that first time. It does make docking a little bit easier, and it basically prevents the rotation of the spacecraft from becoming a problem, at least in certain orientations, especially the above and below orientations. We get Valentina out here to go ahead and do a little bit of a spacewalk, check all the components, make sure things are running smoothly. We are in the light side of Kerbin now, which is good. We have the lower stage detached, and at this point, we're gonna go ahead and build two things. So this is the smallest payload going up to the space station. It's going to be I guess you could say, what do you call this thing? A space truck? It's going to be a little bit of a drone that has a docking nozzle on either side of it. It's going to have RCS propellant, monopropellant in there as well. And basically, you just send this thing out, it attaches itself to a module, and then you can move that module anywhere else on that space station. I think it's a really neat little thing to have. I'm sure a lot of you have kind of built something like this before if you have either a surface base or a actual orbiting space station. But it's a simple concept, right? So it's just going to provide a tugboat type of feel to our space station. And since that thing is so light and basically weightless at this point, I didn't want to waste a full rocket build, so I decided that this is where the communications array is going to be pulled into the station as well. So we're using a lot of structural elements, and I wanted this roundness to happen here. So we're using one of the new decouplers for like landers and things on it, and I just like the industrial look of it all. We're gonna add some basic kind of communication arrays on here. Make sure when they unfold kind of in an interesting pattern. And the overall effect I think is pretty cool. So hopefully you guys like it as well. Plenty a little bit of solar power on here. And in fact, I'm thinking about adding some solar proper arrays onto the space station, but right now it doesn't use as much power as it can generate. So maybe as the thing grows and maybe more things get attached here and there due to your guys' suggestions for things, we might need a little bit bigger of an array. So this is the KSS dish array plus tugboat, and we're gonna make a new rocket for this because the other thing was just completely overkill. This thing only weighs about 3 tons. Granted, I probably still made a completely overkill rocket for this too, but you can see this upper stage is just using a basic engine and just one fuel tank. It's going to have its own command module again, just so that this thing can fly, and when it decouples, we can deorbit it once we are ready for that. We're going to attach a structural element below here, just so that when we do decouple this as well, it will unsheath the engine and keep that safe. And really, I like these spacers that they added to the game because it allows for custom engine shrouds. And I just really like the looks of them. Otherwise, we'd just be using stacks of decouplers on top of each other to essentially do the same thing. But it's weighty to use the decouplers like that. So now that we have the upper stage, which is really going to get us close to the station, we need to first try and figure out how to raise this thing back up so it can finish building the length of the rocket. But we're using, I think, a size smaller than the last engine, and we're going to raise that up there. We're going to attach the monopropellant back because this took way too much time. There we go. And can't use the same engine as before, so I'm testing shrouds, trying to figure out what some of these new pieces do. Don't really want that, and just settle upon widening out the base a little bit and using the standard mainsail. It's the first mainsail that you kind of get through the research tree. We're going to be using solid rocket boosters to the left and the right. No sense using liquid rocket fuel for that. And then this small little rocket is really all you need to get to about 3 tons to the space station. And I'm pretty happy with this one. This one's probably a little bit more of a sensible build. Makes a little bit more sense. The coloration's pretty cool too. I'm happy that we dyed the bottom there with a rocket nozzle just for color's sake. We're gonna launch this thing real quick and burn a whole lot of fuel, and then realize, oh, I didn't wait. Okay, now here's the real launch. Nice cinematic camera view going up through there, making sure the interior is not rattling around too much. And the nice thing is, we have a lot of thrust in the lower parts of the atmosphere. In fact, a little too much thrust. We lose control of it a little bit, and I could have scrubbed the mission right there. But I figured, you know, let's stress this thing completely out. Let's see if doing a complete 360 flip in the wrong direction is enough to kill this mission. And I'll tell you what, I thought it was going to be, but this little rocket, I say little, it's actually kind of big of a rocket, hold true and definitely performed well. So we had enough fail-safe in it. And we're gonna go past the spaceship because this time we left a little early. So we had to go past it, wait for it to catch up. But, you know, we get a little bit of another equipment malfunction with the whole separation of that upper stage. But eventually it kind of phases through, which is fine. Point in, round off this orbit as much as possible, just like that. And I like these smaller kind of attachment nozzles for space stations. They look very industrial, utilitarian, and overall look really cool in space. They just look proper spacecraft to me. Again, we're going to be on the dark side of the planet doing this docking procedure because for some reason Uthris can't plan docking procedures for the light side of the planet. However, the new lights are adding some brightness for you guys, so you have something to look at. Now we're going to be detaching the lower stage there. But first things first, I want to maneuver this using monopropellant most of the way. Just get over to the nozzle, get this lined up. So you can see I'm going to just simply point vertically, just like that. And now use just the RCS while constantly pointing vertically to get us over the nozzle, and then we'll just park it vertically. This is a simple way to dock. It's probably not the quickest way to do so, but I think it works for us. We'll decouple the large engine there, which will deorbit at some point. But for now, realizing that I kind of parked this thing upside down, so we're gonna have to actually undock this whole thing. We're gonna have to control it from there and just flip it around. So just a quick 180 and then put it back on top. That way we can park the tugboat anywhere else that we wish as well. So we'll get that on there. We'll extend all of the satellite relays on this thing. We'll also try and switch to the tugboat, get that parked on the side. I was a little bit worried that it wouldn't fit here either, but turns out, you know, sometimes things work without much planning, which is always good, in our favor for sure. So we can always use this thing, refill it with monopropellant for other missions. And that right there is pretty much the first good look at the current relay or small refueling station that we have in orbit here. So Valentina comes out for her final spacewalk of this episode to take a look, make sure things, you know, are again still operating successfully. The other two inside just enjoying all the snacks in the cupboards. They don't seem to be doing as much as Valentina here. She looks pretty happy with the progress, and I think she really likes that little tugboat there. So with that, we've come to an end of Kerbal Space Program. If you guys are enjoying this series, definitely leave a like, leave a comment down below on anything else you want to see built and missions brought in the future. If you guys want, subscribe to my channel for more creative goodness such as this. Hit that bell, I suppose. Follow us on Discord. We have a Discord server now that you can join. And follow me on Twitter at Uthris. And I'll see you guys in the next episode or on the channel.